In Fayetteville this morning placed 3 schools on lockdown and ended in what police are calling a murder-suicide.
My mom, she said she was already scared.
Now, 2 families are grieving.
Welcome to Fayetteville, North Carolina, a city that's known for its incredibly close-knit community and suburban vibes. But in the early hours of October 21st, 2021, this small community was shaken to its core by a nightmare that no one saw coming.
She was so smart. She was everything.
Enter Xamega, Whitfield, a 25-year-old woman full of hopes and dreams, and Michael Culpepper, just 20. Their love story took a really dark turn out of nowhere. How so? Well, footage taken on that morning reveals one hell of a scene. Michael, with a gun in his hand, in what seems to be a full-on standoff against law enforcement just minutes after taking Zamega's life. But how did they get here? The thing is, something pushed Michael over the edge that day, but was it a crime of passion or something else? And this ain't just a messed up love story, it's so much more than that. We keep it real and dive into some of the most horrifying crime cases ever. So hit that subscribe button and get ready for the ride, because we're about to uncover the whole truth about Zamega, Whitfield, and Michael Culpepper. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one. So Fayetteville, which is right in the middle of North Carolina, is one of those places where everyone kinda knows everyone, and it's also home to the Fort Bragg military base. Usually everything moves slower over here. However, on the cold morning of October 21st, 2021, all of that changed. That being said, at around 7:30 a.m., the haunting ring of emergency dispatchers' phones broke the early morning silence. And to say that multiple calls started flowing in would be a gross understatement. We're talking a lot of calls, all of which were reporting a shooting on Miller Avenue, a quiet and typically peaceful neighborhood street.
Police were called to the scene after reports of shots being fired in the area. Ireland Drive Middle School is just a block away. We're told the school's resource officer heard the shots and put the school on lockdown.
So law enforcement officers did what they usually do and sped towards the scene with their anticipations high, but hearts still very much heavy with the inevitable dread. Upon their arrival, though, things were even worse than what they were expecting. You see, they were greeted with a scene straight out of a nightmare. 20-year-old Michael Culpepper, a recently enlisted soldier, was found kneeling in the middle of the street, holding a gun in his hand. His face was pretty difficult to read, but it's pretty safe to assume that he was probably wanting to harm someone. The officers approached cautiously, weapons drawn and commands clear, but Michael's mind was made, and soon enough, Michael made his final, irreversible decision. He raised the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. And as if that's not bad enough, just a few feet away we have the lifeless body of Zamega Whitfield. She had been shot by Michael, and it was all in cold blood too, because we're not talking about one gunshot wound here. Michael shot her multiple times. The entire scene was very hard to stomach, even for experienced law enforcement officers. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and they attempted to save Michael's life, which by this point was only holding on to a thread. He was rushed to Cape Fear Valley Medical Center, but despite their best efforts, he succumbed to his wounds a little while later. The neighborhood, which by all accounts was as chill and uneventful as it gets, was now transformed into a crime scene. We're talking yellow police tape everywhere, and detectives spread out across the area trying to piece this puzzle together. And as the news of the tragedy spread, friends, family, and curious neighbors began to gather, and they weren't any less shocked than the rest of us. The surveillance footage retrieved later did a great job of filling in the gaps of that tragic morning.
Investigators have neighborhood security camera video that shows Culpepper shooting his girlfriend outside before she runs back into the apartment.
Imagine being shot multiple times in the street as you desperately try to escape from the man you used to call your fiancé. That's one of the most horrible ordeals anyone can possibly imagine. But then it gets even worse.
When police arrived, Culpepper was in the middle of the street with a gun to his head and pulled the trigger.
And to think that there were probably a lot of other bystanders over there too, witnessing all this and getting traumatized. But for the families of Zamega and Michael, these events were more than just a show-stopping headline. They marked the beginning of a lifetime of grief.
She was so smart. She was everything.
How could a loving relationship end in such a violent tragedy? What led Michael to commit such a brutal crime? These are only some of the questions that their families will have to deal with. And frankly, I've been wondering about this case myself, so let's get into it. If you want to understand the gravity of the morning's events, we gotta rewind a bit to the very beginning, because the thing is, Zamega Whitfield and Michael Culpepper seemed like just about any other young, hopeful couple in love. Their story began much like many others, filled with promise, excitement, and dreams of a shared future. Xamegga, who was by all accounts nothing short of a beam of positivity, had worked at Burger King for 6 years. There, she was pretty much liked by everyone, co-workers and customers included. She was the type of person who lit up any room she walked into. Her friends and family described her as brilliant and kind-hearted, someone who wore her heart on her sleeve and left a lasting impact on everyone she met. Michael Culpepper, also affectionately known as Telly Poo, was only 20, but he had already embarked on a path of service in the military. A cavalry scout in the U.S. Army, Michael was seen as a dedicated soldier and overall a pretty great guy, and apparently he was even a mama's boy if the posts on his Facebook are anything to go by. And I quote, "First of all, thank you for being my #1 support system when I needed you most. Thank you for standing by me when I had to make difficult decisions and when we didn't see eye to eye. You let me make my own decisions and gave me the confidence that I was doing the right thing, even when really I wasn't doing the right thing. The lessons you have taught me about life and how to be successful at whatever I do will take me far. Thank you for giving me a hug every day and still calling me your baby, even when you're mad at me." I'd say that's a pretty sweet Mother's Day message, right? But let's move on. Zamega and Michael's relationship seemed to flourish with the same warmth and affection. They moved in together on Miller Avenue, a significant step that reflected their commitment to each other. And by January 2021, they were already engaged, declaring their love not just to each other, but also to the world through social media. Don't believe me? Michael's tattoo of Zamegga's name on his arm pretty much seals the deal here, don't you think? Now here's where the idyllic facade begins to crack. As with many young couples, the stresses of life, including Michael's new military career and personal insecurities, began to weigh heavily. That being said, arguments, once rare, became more frequent. Family members and friends noticed changes. When these two walked into the room, you could cut the thick tension with a knife. But despite the external pressures, their love for each other overshadowed all that. Michael would often post adoring messages about Zamega, painting a clear picture of a man deeply in love. Yet underneath these declarations, something darker was bubbling beneath the surface. And by the time Xamegga decided to finally leave Michael, it was clear that their relationship had reached a breaking point. The solid foundation of their love was now kind of riddled with a whole bunch of cracks. Well, I'm kind of underselling it right now, since we all know of what was about to happen. So what exactly went wrong? Well, we know that the night before the fateful shooting, the tension between Michael and Xamegga sure hit a boiling point. It was a quiet evening that quickly turned tumultuous when a heated argument erupted, but this wasn't one of their regular arguments. Oh no, this was the worst spat they've ever had. The thing is, this time around Michael got violent. He smashed the window of a rental car that Zamegga's mother had borrowed to help with the move. I guess you can take the shattered glass as a symbol of their equally as broken relationship. Not only that, but family members and neighbors were aware of the loud sounds coming from their house for the whole duration of their fight, but no one really anticipated just how badly the situation was going to escalate. As the night progressed, the argument continued to get more and more intense. It's sad to think that Michael and Xamegga were recently engaged and probably planning their wedding, but this all seemed like a distant memory now. But it wasn't until the early hours of the morning, just as the first light of dawn started to break, that the full scale of the tragedy began to truly unravel. After the fact, some people argued that it was a private matter, and others believed intervention might have prevented things from getting as bad as they did. But, you know, situations like this can be very delicate, and I, for one, can't really blame either side. Sadly, Michael's erratic behavior and emotional instability culminated in the ultimate act of violence. UC was unable to accept the impending end of their relationship, unable to face a future without the woman he claimed to love more than anything. Which brings us to that tragic morning that changed everything. The time is now 7:30 a.m., and Xamegga and Michael's neighbors suddenly get woken up by the sound of gunshots echoing through the neighborhood. Alarmed by the sudden eruption of violence, they wasted no time and took immediate action. Calls to 911 poured in, each reporting the same exact scene, a man with a gun firing shots in the street, and those brave enough to look outside witnessed a sight that would haunt them forever. Michael Culpepper mindlessly firing at Xamegga Whitfield as she was desperately trying to flee. Sadly, as Xamegga ran for her life, Michael's bullets found their target, and soon enough she fell to the ground, mortally wounded. Just imagine how shocking it must be to see her trying to escape only to be gunned down by this man. By this time, officers were already at the scene, and what a scene that was. Michael was now kneeling with the gun still in his hand. The horror in his eyes was evident even from a distance, but the officers had virtually no time to react before he turned the weapon on himself. And after that one shot rang out, Michael fell to the ground. He was critically wounded, and it was only a matter of time before he, too, would meet his end by his own doing. But obviously, you can't deny a man a shot at life, not even if he's a criminal. Paramedics arrived shortly thereafter to take him to Cape Fear Valley Medical Center, but there was little hope that he'd ever make it out. His injuries were too severe, and despite their best efforts, he succumbed shortly after arriving at the hospital. And while all of that was going on, Xamegga's body just laid there, like a cruel reminder of just how quickly a life can be cut short for no real reason. The whole hood rushed in. Tears, screams, you name it. What was once a chill block now looked like something out of a crime flick. Blood on the pavement, echoes of shots hanging heavy in the air. Surveillance footage spilled the beans on what went down that morning. Michael's rage was front and center, chasing Zamega like something out of your worst nightmare. And then boom, it was over. The footage, chilling as it was, became the hood's twisted history lesson. And of course, authorities tried to piece it all together, but the truth was straight up horrifying. Folks heard the shots, dialed 911 like crazy, and watched as the streets turned into an all-out madhouse. Everyone was asking the same thing. How did love go so wrong, ending in such a messed up way? Once the dust settled, Fayetteville was left with a creepy feeling hanging in the air. Just about everyone was feeling the weight of what went down that morning. Friends, family, neighbors, everyone was trying to wrap their heads around how things went so sideways for Michael and Zamega. This is where the authorities kick into gear and try to make sense of what happened. And let me tell you, the Fayetteville PD wasted absolutely no time. Detectives got down and dirty, picking up shell casings, tracing bullet paths, and diving deep into that surveillance footage. Every little detail got logged, and it ended up painting a clearer picture of what went down. That footage was like the hood's own reality show. On it, you could see every move that Michael made. From the first sparks of confrontation to the gut-wrenching end, it was all there. Michael's violent pursuit, the shots ringing out as Zamega tried to bail. It was like watching a horror flick in real life. And when he turned that gun on himself? Yeah, that was captured too, no holds barred. It left no doubt about the weight of his actions and how it all ended. And obviously, witnesses were interviewed, including the neighbors I just told you about, the ones who heard all the fighting going on and the gunshots that followed. Their accounts, combined with all that physical evidence, helped the authorities paint a pretty good picture of the entire timeline. But that's not to say that the community wasn't just about as shocked as they could be, since they didn't seem to understand how a relationship that was once filled with so much love could end in such a violent manner. And you're probably wondering what Zamega and Michael's families have to say about all of this. Well, for starters, the investigation did bring about a whole mix of emotions. Obviously, there was a desperate need for answers, a need to understand what could possibly drive Michael to such an act of violence. And at the same time, their grief was overwhelming, since everything went down so publicly, and there was a lot of scrutiny surrounding it all. I wasn't to single out Zamega's sister, Sierra Bell, here, because she struggled to comprehend the loss the most. You can even see it in her tearful TV confession.
She was so smart. She was everything.
It's really hard to imagine the kind of pain she has to go through, especially when you consider that the whole incident played out on video for everyone to see. And that's not all. Michael's family, too, was left in shock, probably even more so since his actions were pretty unthinkable for a guy who didn't seem deranged, not at first glance and not even to the people who were the closest to him.
Family members had no idea the couple was going through a crisis.
He didn't discuss that much. When he come around us, he just tried to make it about us.
I mean, it's one thing to grapple with losing a loved one, but it's a whole nother thing to have to face the fact that he was also responsible for the horrifying act of taking his girlfriend's life. One thing that always happens when such a case takes place is that there's a spike in talks about domestic violence. You know, just people educating themselves on stuff like warning signs, preventative measures, and even ways to safely escape, which I'd argue was exactly what Zamega would have needed. And that's a good thing. Why not take measures to prevent tragedies like this from ever happening again? Why not look at what went wrong and ask yourself, can I accurately spot the signs early on? Come to think of it, why not do it right now? As they say, hindsight is 20/20, and while taking a look at Michael and taking a look at Michael and Zamega's relationship, you can spot troubling signs that had been either missed or underestimated. So as friends and family shuffled through their memories, they began to notice a narrative of escalating tensions and emotional turmoil. But you know know what they say? Hindsight is always 20/20. So, what were these signs, you ask? Well, look no further than Michael's own Facebook posts, for instance. They were once filled with declarations of love and gratitude, but as time went on, they then seemed to carry undertones of possessiveness and desperation. His dedication to Zamega, while outwardly romantic, hinted at a dependency that grew increasingly unhealthy, and his heartfelt messages to his mama. They actually reflected a young man dealing with a ton of internal conflicts, who was using his relationships to anchor himself in an uncertain world. I mean, if you take a closer look at what he wrote, it does seem a bit odd to say the least. And Xamegga, for her part, seemed pretty cheerful overall and dedicated to her work at Burger King. However, her decision to leave the relationship was a clear indicator that things had deteriorated beyond repair. The arguments that became more frequent and more intense were signs that the foundation of their relationship was crumbling. Looking back, the shattered rental car window was not just an act of vandalism, it was a cry for help, a manifestation of Michael's spiraling state of mind. Family members now realized that the warning signs had been way more apparent than they had initially understood.
I guess last night they had got into it, whatever, and then he had busted my mom rental car window because they was moving stuff in her house. And next morning, my mom, she said she was already scared.
That being said, the escalation from emotional outbursts to physical violence was a progression they definitely regretted not recognizing sooner. And it's no wonder that Michael's family, who described him as loving and caring, struggled to reconcile this image with the young man who had committed such a violent act. They realized that while Michael had always focused on the well-being of others, he was hiding his own struggles. His erratic behavior in the days leading up to the tragedy, like the day before when he smashed the car window to pieces, could now be seen as a desperate attempt to maintain control over a situation slipping through his fingers. Xamegga's family, too, pieced together moments that hinted at underlying issues. The argument the night before, the threats, and the violence were signs that Michael was not coping well with the impending separation. And needless to say, friends and family wished they had looked into the relationship on a deeper level, offered more support, or sought outside help. You see, mental health issues are often stigmatized and overlooked, but they clearly played a crucial role in this tragic outcome. But let's also talk about one very important thing we shouldn't miss here. Let me ask you this. Did you know that the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship, much like the one Xamegga was dealing with, is, ironically, when you try to leave? Yep, you heard that right. But how can that be? Well, we all know that there's some pretty vicious abusers out there, waiting for the chance to harm their next victim. But have you ever stopped to wonder why? What is it that they want? And I've got the answer to that. It's control. Abuse always boils down to control. Do you see where I'm getting at? Obviously, when you try to leave your abuser, he's gonna feel like he's losing all of that sweet leverage that he's had. That's exactly when he'll strike, hoping to reinstate all of that power that he's lost.
What's the most dangerous moment in a domestic violence relationship? It's when you leave. You have decided that you're going to leave your abuser and you actually do it. That is the most dangerous time. That is when fights happen. That is when people get killed. That is when people get strangled. That's when all sorts of bad things happen.
And this is exactly what happened to Xamegga, unfortunately. And nothing will ever bring her back into her loved one's arms. But while Xamegga's gone, and there's nothing anyone can do about it, not all hope's lost. Let me explain. Obviously, the whole Fayetteville community felt the shockwaves of Zamega Whitfield and Michael Culpepper's deaths, but instead of just mourning, everyone jumped into action. From community leaders to regular Joes, everyone came together to tackle the tough stuff, like domestic violence and mental health.
Anybody just going through a hard time, I just ask that somebody reach out to them and hold them close, call them, text them. Don't give up on them.
Local groups stepped up big time, offering help to folks stuck in bad situations. Workshops, hotlines, support groups, everyone was on deck, making sure nobody felt alone in their struggle. And law enforcement, they teamed up with these groups, making sure folks knew they had backup if things got rough. It was all about having each other's backs before things went south. Mental health was a big focus too. The tragedy of Xamegga and Michael was a wake-up call. Community centers beefed up their counseling services, making sure folks had a place to turn when things got heavy. And schools didn't sit this one out either. They started teaching kids about healthy relationships and how to deal when things got rocky. It was all about giving them the tools to handle life's curveballs. And the media? They kept the conversation going. News stories, social media campaigns, everyone was spreading the word, making sure nobody forgot what happened and what needed to change. And through all the pain and heartache, one thing was clear: Fayetteville wasn't backing down. Zamega and Michael's families turned their grief into action, pushing for a better, safer community. And with everyone's help, they are making it happen. In the end, let's reflect on the tragic loss of Xamegga Whitfield and Michael Culpepper, but also on the light and love Zamega brought into the lives of everyone who knew her. And remember, even though her story is pretty heartbreaking, it also serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of mental health awareness and the need for support in times of crisis. By sharing her story, I truly hope I can shine a light on the silent struggles many face and encourage open conversations about domestic violence and emotional well-being. Remember, no one should ever feel alone, and help is always available. And to all of you viewers, if you or someone you know is experiencing difficulties, reach out, lend a hand, or simply be there to listen. That can make the biggest difference. Thanks you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe for more compelling stories and give this video a thumbs up. Also, feel free to leave a comment below to share your thoughts, and let's continue these important conversations. Stay safe and be kind. Until next time, stay safe, guys.